Thanks for joining us tonight. Green Bay's Public Schools Superintendent Claude Tiller Jr. is on paid administrative leave. The Board of Education made that announcement late this afternoon. It's reviewing comments he apparently made during a radio interview on a recruiting trip to Atlanta.
The attorney for the school board told Action 2 News tonight that the video footage from that interview will be released to us 1 week from tomorrow on Wednesday, February 21st. As we told you first last night on Action 2 News, a former Green Bay school principal told the school board what he heard Tiller say during the radio interview that was also streamed online. During a radio break, when the mics were still on, he says the superintendent verbally attacked a coworker and a majority of the district's teachers.
Brittany Schmidt tells us what she learned about recent district recommendations that may give some context in this First Alert update tonight.
On Tuesday, we reviewed an external analysis on the district that an educational consulting firm did for Tiller after his arrival last summer. It points to some big issues between those who work for the district and those who work in the schools. In the 34-page document we obtained on Tuesday, the consultants report a reoccurring theme of frustration with decision-making on the district level. It also speaks of a dynamic of distrust and antagonism, specifically with district senior leaders resisting engaging with teachers and principals at the actual schools. The report noted that virtually every senior leader at the district has been in place for more than a decade, besides the superintendent. The consultants call it a, quote, lack of divergent voices representing new perspectives, end quote. And they mention this leads to internal dialogue that can be stagnant or what they call turf wars among parties. As for Tiller, his social media is blanketed with visits to schools and community events. He also put forth a list of what he calls strategic actions for the school year that specifically called on district leaders to get involved at the schools. Action 2 News has made repeated requests to speak with Superintendent Tiller about the ongoing review into his conduct in Atlanta, but have not heard back. We talked to several parents picking up their kids from a Green Bay school who said they want to see the video for themselves before they comment on Tiller's alleged comments, calling a subordinate a wicked witch and calling into question 92% of the teaching staff to do their jobs. One grandma talked to us on camera about it.
That's truly what he said. That's inappropriate. You would think teachers and superintendents need to work together as a team, not going against them. So, yeah, I don't feel he should stay as superintendent if that's how he feels and talks. It's not appropriate.
I reached out to the Green Bay Education Association. The president tells me they do not have a comment regarding the investigation at this time. They are waiting for the full video and interview to be released as well. In the newsroom, Brittany Schmidt, Action 2 News.